Hi, everyone, and thanks for listening to the Admit One podcast, where we talk to students who have successfully navigated the college admission process and earned their ticket to college. We'll be reflecting on the student's profile, which will include a discussion about their academic record, extracurricular endeavors, and application strategy. Today's guest is Lorenzo, who is a life science management major at the University of Pennsylvania. So excited to talk to you today, Lorenzo, a little bit about your college search process, learn more about how you kind of ended up at the University of Pennsylvania, and what were some of the things that got you there. So thanks for joining us.
Of course.
So let's just start a little bit, getting a little bit of background and some context from you. Talk to me a little bit about your where you went to high school. What was your school like, and academically, what were some of the things that you were primarily interested in?
So I was born and raised here in Zurich, Switzerland. So I went to a Swiss high school, although in a bilingual program. So I was always doing around 50-50 English and German. Half my classes were in English. And my primary interest actually in high school was biology and chemistry, because in Swiss high schools, you're forced to specialize relatively early. So you need to pick something called a Schwerpunktfach, meaning something you'd like to specialize in college. And I picked biology and chemistry, which I found extremely interesting because we had lab, which is something that you don't get a lot of exposure to otherwise in high school. So we had a lot more lab and a lot more hands-on work. And we got to delve just a little bit deeper really into the topics.
Cool. So maybe talk to us a little bit about that selection process for you, because the U.S. system, as I'm sure you've become abundantly aware of, is a little bit more, let's call it holistic and interdisciplinary and things like that. So when you're making the selection for your track and kind of your interests, is there a thought in your mind of, I might want to apply to the U.S.? Do you know anything about that? Like what's kind of the conversation that you're having either internally or with your school?
No, I had no idea going in what this was going to mean, like what implication this was going to have on my future, as in what I would want to study in college. I just knew that I wanted to do something that was math-based. So there's a lot of math there. And I just knew that, I don't know, I was interested. I was more of a naturalist. So I was interested in the natural sciences. So it was clear to me that, pursuing that was probably a good idea. But at the same time, I didn't really know what I wanted. And choosing this, I kind of opted out of other things that I didn't know as well. So there was no way for me to tell what would be the best option at the time. Yeah.
So when you're a senior in high school, what does your course list look like? Like, what are some of the classes that you're taking senior year?
Well, in Switzerland, you don't have like AP anything. It's just really a basic course load that you have to take. Everyone takes the same one. So I had all the basics in terms of math. Math just encompassed really everything in math. Then I had biology, chemistry, physics, German, English, French as an additional language, because you're required to take French in Swiss high schools. At the beginning of high school, this was in middle school but everything is connected, right, in Switzerland. High school, middle school, it's all together. Where I was in the same school for those 6 years. And we had Latin for 2 years as well. So it's definitely more language heavy. Other courses I had music, I had design, right, arts. I had sports, PE. Yeah, all the basics.
Yeah, so it's definitely like, from a curriculum standpoint, similar to a lot of U.S. schools where you're taking kind of across the curriculum types of courses, as opposed to like in the UK, they have specializations. In India, they have specializations. So you're still taking a lot of broad-based, and obviously language is a big part of that, because so many different languages within Switzerland. So super interesting there. So okay, so you've got kind of a focus of bio and chem, and that's kind of your target area. Are there like projects that you're working on related to those topics, or is it just more of an enhanced curriculum, a higher level coursework? Like how does that work?
Well, it's definitely a higher level coursework, but as well, like I was saying, in lab we did very specific things. We had projects like one per month or something, which took several weeks to complete. So it was like extensive lab work, not just you show up and you make something quickly and that's it, right? We did like a lot of stuff with genome editing. We worked with K12 E. coli bacteria. We did a lot of dissections of different invertebrates and mammals. So it was quite interesting, really hands-on work that it was just trying to give us a feel of what's really out there.
Yep.
In terms of practical things that we could do with the theory. It was connecting theory to practice, which you have less of if you don't choose biochemistry as your
Cool.
specialization. Yeah.
Interesting. And then talk to me a little bit about outside the classroom. So what are some of the things that you're involved with in high school, from whether it's within your school or within the larger community? Like, what does your involvement look like?
Well, within most Swiss high schools, unless if you're in an international school, which models itself after the American high schools, there's really not much in Swiss high schools in terms of clubs or anything. I mean, there are exceptions, but I really wasn't involved with my high school at all when it came to like extracurriculars. Everything was outside. My sports teams were outside. I played tennis, um, and other things I did were also outside. I'm interested in music, and I was part of the school band, but that was kind of minor compared to how much I practice outside, just privately.
Mm-hmm. And what did you play?
The drums.
Cool.
Yeah. Then I also had my own project going on, which was I started in school because the school gave me the time to do it. Is something called a Matura project. So a Matura is like, right, it's like the IB is just your it's just like what you finish in school, right? That's the
like
name
a capstone.
For it. Exactly.
Capstone kind of project.
And that was my project, which I did outside of school, but the school also gave me some time to work on it.
So talk to me a little bit about that project. What's that kind of the mindset and what's the approach to it?
So that was kind of reconnecting with my Bulgarian side, also for a project. It was a social entrepreneurship project called Cats of Burgas. So it was based on basically aiding the stray cat population in Burgas, the city where my grandmother from Bulgaria lives. Because I'd spent a childhood basically every summer we'd be in Bulgaria for a month, and I'd be seeing these cats, right? And I was always feeding them, so it was like a small scale help, right? But then what's interesting is, coming out of high school, having studied all these things, was how can I, from like a management perspective, like create a project where I could manage to help the problem in Burgas on like a bigger scale, right? Like top down, since I know the bottom up side of how they struggled and how difficult their life is, really, because it is a huge issue and how many of the cats there are, and it's undocumented. So it's pretty much like a blank slate. I could have done anything. Sure. Mm-hmm. And that was very interesting because I got to collaborate with the government. And the mission was really just like, how do you help the cats, but also improve the relationship of the cats to the people?
So so you have this idea, right? And then, so what's the next step? Like, how do you implement something? How do you actually improve the lives of these cats? Like, what's the approach there?
Well, the implementation is difficult, especially in a place like Bulgaria where, money is scarce and general support for these ideas is scarce because, how can the people help animals when they can't even help themselves, right? That's kind of the issue. They don't have enough to get by. So they're not looking at the cats. That's not their first priority. So for me, it was really just how do I make something happen was I just need to get out there, So I went there as soon as I could, and I spent a long time just talking to people, right? Because that's step number one. It's really how do you get the idea somewhere in their mind, Because the beginning is in Bulgaria, you talk to them and it's no, right? They don't want to hear about it because they have other things to deal with. So you're met with not a lot of support. But I think it's just important that you really just set your idea out there and, let them think about it for a while. And then, I held some presentations also for the mayor of the city, basically like outlining how I would do it. So not just what I wanted to do, but how I would go about doing it. And also like funding ideas and stuff like that. And obviously to this day, I haven't implemented it it's not like it's fixed, right? This is something that's going to take a long time and something that I'm going to pursue during my college career as well. But it was important for me that I make like a brief outline of really the whole project. How I would go about doing it, meet the right people that could collaborate with me. Because I also talked to Four Paws, which is Vier Pfoten. It's a larger animal rescue organization in Europe. Yep. And so that was interesting also to hear their perspective on it. Yeah.
So how do you like make these connections? Is that through like family contacts that you have, or is that like you're reaching out to people and saying, hey, can we talk about this? Like what is that? How do you establish those?
It's a bit of both. I mean, Bulgaria is not as interconnected as a place like Switzerland where you can really just reach out. Sometimes you don't even know how to reach out because they don't have a contact or anything. So like getting into the mayor's office and stuff like that was more just through family, but distant connections. Not like I knew them. It's just really just distant connections. And then, but working with like the bigger organizations like Four Paws was just directly reaching out, cold emailing and seeing what sticks, if they write back to me or not. I mean, some people didn't write back, but that's just how it works.
I think that's like one of the more interesting parts of your story narrative and what I think a lot of times people like students oftentimes have an idea and then they want the idea to just come to fruition. And the reality is like life doesn't work like that, right? There's ebbs and flows and some things work, some things don't work, but it's really from a college standpoint where I find the most value is the narrative of like, how did you pursue something? How did you think critically, and how did you utilize the network and the extended network that you have? So to your point, like, okay, I had a connection. It's a distant connection, but like, let me see how this hits. And maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. Or I'm going to reach out to this organization and see if they're interested. And probably they won't be, but occasionally you'll get one or two that are. And it's just making sure you're prepared for those conversations and that you can build off of, the perspective and work that you've already done. And so to me, I find that is actually the most interesting thing is how have you pursued this area of interest over an extended period of time, and learned how to take no's and learn how to be shut down and all of that. And so were there times where you're like, this isn't going to work, I'm like frustrated, I don't feel like this is the project for me, kind of thing, or were you just always all in on it?
Yeah, I mean, all the time I'd be questioning myself. I was always all in on it, but then
Mm-hmm.
at certain steps along the way, I was like, wait, is this really the right path I've been taking? Like, have I taken a complete misdirection somewhere along the way where I should now go back
Mm-hmm.
to? So it's a lot of
Yep.
like, should I retrace my steps kind of thing? Because obviously, working with these projects, there's not a lot there to go off of. So I have to like reach I take some kind of assumptions, right? I make assumptions and
Sure.
I go off of those. And so that's a dangerous thing, because if you make like a wrong base assumption, I mean, you could go and, you could end up somewhere that's not quite right for the project and for the cats,
Sure.
for that matter.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of
Yeah.
questioning that. But I just think that's the important part of like the process. If you're not doing that, like you should be a little worried. Yeah.
And then from a capstone standpoint, like, what's the end result? Like, what do you end up presenting to, your school? Like, what do you have in finality?
In finality, I have like a pretty well written up report that's around 50 pages, including, so it's like a little booklet, right? Includes the entire process, right? How I went about it. I logged all my steps, right, in a logbook, different communication that I had with people, and then like a conclusion, obviously, right, of how my project went and reflection. So yeah, it's that kind of a report.
Okay. And then is this, when you're applying to college, is this a pretty significant component to your application, this project? Like, talk to me a little bit about how you then present that, that work.
Well, the capstone itself could have been completely insignificant, right? It really, for me, it was just something that was so personal that I was going to talk about it anyway, right? I just needed a form for it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought this was the right appropriate form, because in a way I was showing how, I come from different places, Bulgaria, I'm half American, but I've lived in Switzerland my whole life. So I tried to combine those three, right, identities into a work project, right? So how I really brought myself to life, right, through this project, and my different sides, right? How I collaborated with myself in a way. That's what I wrote about, right? Not as much of what I did, but like why I did it and why that's important to me.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I think one of the themes that I got when kind of looking at some of your application stuff is the idea of interdisciplinary. And we'll talk a little bit about your supplemental that you use to the University of Pennsylvania, but the idea of interdisciplinary, not only from an academic standpoint, but from just your own personal experiences and kind of navigating different cultures and communities and finding intersections within those. And I think when you look at virtually any U.S. college or university, they're going to talk about their commitment to interdisciplinary learning.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I talk to students about all the time is like, think about what's the messaging that the institution is presenting, and if it's something about interdisciplinary learning, you want to be able to demonstrate your commitment to that. And I think throughout your application, you do a lot of that. I wonder from your perspective, as you apply to college, is that something that you're cognizant of like, I'm trying to present my interdisciplinary understanding of myself and academics? Or is it just like, look, I have these different identities and I'm trying to navigate them in different ways, and I'm just going to tell my story? Like, is there an approach to it, or are you're like, look, I'm just going to put myself out there?
No, I definitely made a conscious effort, right, to illustrate that I was a very interdisciplinary person. But I mean, something that's unique about where I'm coming from in Switzerland is like honestly, right, the base decision on even going to the US, because that's not something, I'm the only one that's going to the US for my school, right?
Mm-hmm.
So making that decision meant that I really wanted to embrace a liberal arts curriculum where there is interdisciplinary study, right, such as at Penn. Because in Switzerland, if you go to college, you usually specialize again relatively early.
Yep.
So I would be doing only economics, or I'd be doing mainly, chemistry, because the schools are then they cater to certain subjects, right? So I'd have to make that
Yeah.
selection. But going to the US, it was clear to me that I want to go to the US because I want to study broadly and then also go into depth.
So that's interesting. So let's talk a little bit about that kind of, when do you make a decision of, okay, I want to go to the US, or when you're starting to apply, are you thinking like, maybe I'll go to the US, maybe I'll stay in Switzerland, maybe I'll go somewhere else? Like, what's kind of your mindset, and how do you decide that the US is the direction that you want to go when pretty much nobody else in your school is
Yeah.
doing that? Like, how do you come to that conclusion?
Well, I can't say there was like a clear moment or one individual moment that really, decided it for me. But having my father, which is American, he was always like feeding that idea into the back of my mind. Like, you should think about the US, consider the US. He was sending me things, I was reading things. So it was always in the back of my head somewhere, right? And then in school, we never had a counselor or anything like for colleges. So it's really just, this pretty straight path to the university in Switzerland then. Because having a matura, right, you don't even need to apply. You get in.
Sure.
There's no exam, there's no nothing. So yeah, for me, it was just really maybe the year before senior year. So my 5th year in that school, I decided that, I don't know, I kind of like faced myself with it, like the decision. Because like now it was real, because now I really need to start thinking about it, the SATs, everything. Because I had nothing from school, right? So I really need to organize myself. So I need to take responsibility all of a sudden. Otherwise, it wasn't going to work. It was like as clear as that. Either I go now or I don't go at all, because I can't like halfway go through with it, right? Yeah.
Did you think that there was a chance still, as you enter, you're getting ready for your senior year? Did you think there's still a chance that you stay in Switzerland and you go to school there?
Well,
or were you like, I'm all in on the US now?
Well, it kind of came down to my strategy, because when I applied to the US, I applied to like only the best schools. I just reached for the stars, and I decided, if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. And I consciously didn't apply to any safeties, because I wanted to go to a good school, and I kind of had the safety in Switzerland, even though I knew I didn't want to stay in Switzerland. So I was pretty clear on that. So I thought maybe, I was going to take a gap year anyway, so maybe I could apply again next year, or find some other way around it, right? But there was this sense of comfort coming from Switzerland, knowing that, even if all else fails, I'll have a backup school here that I don't need to do anything for. And it's a great school. There's great schools here. So, yeah.
Totally. I think so. There's two things I wanted to kind of touch on. The first is the idea of going internationally. And then the second is kind of the idea of having like a backup plan. Let's start with the idea of going internationally. So any student that I work with, I encourage them to think of, look into, let's call it like some basic research into theoretically the idea of studying abroad. And most of the vast majority of students that I've worked with in my life have been from the US. And I think for US students, there's, for whatever reason, a tremendous hesitancy to look outside of the US. But for me, it's also, look, you get to go to college once. Like, this is a once in a lifetime deal. You can literally study anywhere in the world, and you can learn about whatever you want to learn about. This is a once in a lifetime deal. Like, why not look at other options? I wonder if you have any advice for students, whether Switzerland or anywhere, about the approach of thinking about going internationally, and like what we're maybe overcoming the nerves of, this is what normally happens within our society, and I'm going to do something different. Like, would you have any advice for anybody related to that?
I can only speak right from my perspective, but coming from a school where it was not the norm to do it, I was kind of an outlier. And I don't know, I think it's just really important to see what's out there. Even if you don't decide to go, just do your research, be aware of all your options. And then when it comes down to it, just figure out what's most important to you. And also keep in mind that for most people, you can always come back home. Home is not really a place that's going to vanish while you're at college. Obviously, it's not true for everyone, but I knew that I could always come back to Zurich. I could always come back to Switzerland, But college is really the one time, like you said, you can only go to college once. It's the one time I can choose what I want to do, where I want to go. And, why not step out of my comfort zone like a little, especially if I know that there's there's a lot of upside potential. So.
Yep. And it's so funny because we talk a lot on this podcast about like developing your profile and thinking about what are the things that that you like to do and how can you do them in different ways and ways that are unique and will help you to stand out. And I think sometimes uh, sometimes it's this mindset of like, okay, I'm going to develop my profile in order to go to college. But the reality is like your profile development is something that's part of your life forever, right? Whatever you want to do, if you once you're out of college, if you want to go to grad school or you're looking for jobs or whatever. And so I think about, if you stayed in Switzerland and you got a degree in economics, that's great. I'm not knocking that at all, but there's thousands of people who do that, right? Or if you're in the US and you get a degree in business and you come out and you say, okay, I went to this great school and I have a degree in business. Okay, sure. But thousands of people do that. When you look at it and you say, instead, I after high school wanted to study internationally. I studied in a different country. I learned about this. You're bringing the perspectives that you have are so unique, and the profile development is so unique comparatively to what your peers have done, that when you then get ready to apply for a job, oh, well, this is interesting. This person's coming from here. They've lived in the US or vice versa, or, they've gone elsewhere. They have a degree from this institution. They're now coming back. Like profile development is something it's not just the goal isn't going to college. I don't think for anybody at the end of the day, it's having a successful life and challenging yourself and doing things of importance and things that are relevant and significant for you. So I think that that's such an interesting thing that sometimes students and families miss in this, is like the idea of developing your profile over the long period. Part of that starts now and is thinking critically about how do I do the things that I'm interested in?
Yeah, I agree. Well, I think the issue sometimes is, making these big decisions, people are sometimes driven more by fear than really reason, because they want to follow the herd. There's a reason why everyone's doing this. Why should I step out of line and do my own thing?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And yeah, you're really just like, you're just driven by the fear then, as opposed to, really finding out for yourself what's best for you, like what opportunities are there. Like for me personally, it was, I could combine my interests at Penn, for instance, in the LSM program, right? Life sciences and management. And I could be taking all these different electives, something that I couldn't do in Switzerland. So even though everyone was going to Switzerland, just because everyone's doing it doesn't mean it's the right thing for you. That's what my main takeaway was. Yeah.
Yeah. I also want to come back to the idea of like having a safety net, whether it's a place. And I would prefer, obviously, if when I'm working with students, I'd certainly prefer it if that safety net is one that they're really interested in and excited about. But I work with a lot of kids also like in California, and their state system is really strong. And they say, look, if I have to go to, a UC or a Cal State or something like that, it's not the end of the world. I feel good about that. I want to apply to some of these other places. And realistically for me, the cost of education is so high that, okay, if you want to kind of shoot for, some of the most competitive schools, and you're also very comfortable with what your in-state or, home base options are, I think that's really reasonable. The challenge then becomes like, okay, if I don't get that, what does that look like? So talk to me a little bit about, from a strategic standpoint, like, did you apply early decision places? Did you have a school that you were most interested in prior to applying? Like, what was that kind of approach like for you?
I did, but I learned a lot, right, along the way. I mean, I applied EA to Stanford. And honestly, now looking back, I don't think I knew enough about Stanford. But the issue is I didn't know enough about myself and really what I wanted to study. So it was I was just throwing a Hail Mary. I mean, I thought it was a great idea. And obviously, you can't really go wrong with Stanford, right? It's like a brand name. But
Sure.
Actually, now getting into Penn, I realized how much better of a fit Penn is for me, right? And yeah, that's the only school I applied early to. The rest I did regular decision. And like I said, I applied to pretty much just, pretty much all of the Ivies, and then just a lot of the best schools near cities, because I wanted to be near a city. I didn't want to be in the middle of nowhere. It's important to me coming from Zurich.
Sure.
And yeah, obviously these decisions never come out as planned. Or not never,
no.
But
very rarely though. Yeah.
For me, it was a complete shock that I got into Penn. I mean, I had very limited exposure to Penn, or had even thought about Penn a lot. I hadn't, right? But I don't know, for me at least, it goes to show, I don't know whether it's true or not, but somehow the school did choose me at the end of the day, and it kind of made a good fit for me, even though I wasn't aware of it at the time. Yeah. It's a better fit than pretty much, like now, going back now, and I'm being honest, if I could choose any school on my list, I'd choose Penn, just because of the curriculum and the courses that I would be able to take now. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
And I think a lot of that does come through, in my opinion, through application stuff. And there's a lot of feedback from people about, like, what are these supplemental essays do, and what are people really looking for, and what role do they play, and all of those kinds of things. And how do I get into one place and not into another? And so much of it, I guess, is subjective. But I also think that at the end of the day, you're presenting yourself in a way that's specific to you, and some schools are going to, just like if you're on match.com or something, and you see some profile of somebody, that, or Tinder or whatever, you're like, oh, I like this person, and then that person doesn't reciprocate. Like, that's how life works sometimes, and that's okay. It's just, you've got to find the right match for you. And once you get there too, I always think that so much of it from high school students a lot of times is, like, I call it, like, the sweatshirt problem of, when you're in high school and you get into college, right? You have, like, those 6-8 months of, I got into this school, and you start wearing their sweatshirt, and you want to feel proud about that sweatshirt, as you're walking around high school. And I get that. But the reality is, like, wherever you end up going to college, everyone's going to be wearing the same sweatshirt. So who cares about, like, the 6 months between the time you get your decision and the time you leave for college or whatever? Whenever you get to that school, everyone's going to be wearing that same sweatshirt, and they're all going to be excited about this place that they're at, and you're all kind of there together. So I think that there's a lot of importance in that, and I hope some of the students that listen take that away of, like, you're going to get some no's, it's going to be deflating, but you're going to find a place that makes sense for you. Cool. So let's talk a little bit about your supplemental essay, because I think that this is a type of question that colleges often ask students of, like, why do you want to come here? And I think that that's sometimes a struggle for students to communicate really effectively. I think you do a very good job of it. So I'm going to bring it up so that people can read along with us.
Yeah, it's definitely difficult. It takes a lot of time answering that one. Yeah.
So I think that one of the things that is most challenging in this is you basically have to be able to say, here are the things that I have done. Here are the things that the school offers. And I'm going to utilize the things that the school offers to propel the things that I've done in my areas of interest.
Correct.
And I think that you do a really, really good job of kind of putting that out there and making that clear. I wonder, from your perspective, like, talk to me a little bit about the research process into writing this essay. How did you approach the essay? What were you trying to convey? Just what was your mindset as you started writing it?
Well, one of the issues I first made when I was trying to write these types of essays was I was listening too much about the school rather than really talking about myself and connecting the two, right? And I feel like that probably happens to a lot of people because they do their research and they find all these things, and it just becomes into more of a list, right, of just great things that the school does. But the school already knows that, right? What they want to hear about is what you have to offer and how you could connect with those things, right? And further yourself or the school's, course itself. So for me, it was definitely extensive research, but it was not research for the sake of research, just like finding out everything about the school. It was more I had to choose, like, specific topics about me, specific things about me that I wanted to do at the school. And then I tried to, save time by only looking at those and, getting it relatively specific, as opposed to just, starting on the home webpage and going through everything and trying to find something. I think it has to be more about you than really the school.
I love that.
That's what I was trying to do.
I think that hits the nail on the head. I mean, I see students all the time who it's like, Penn does this, Penn does this, Penn does this, Penn does this. And okay, those things are true and accurate, and those are good elements of the institution. But what is it that you're going to do to utilize those types of things? And then also, like, it's a missed opportunity because you only have so much space to talk about the things that you have done. And if the supplemental is basically saying, why do you want to come here? I think the approach to that oftentimes for students is telling them all of the amazing things about the institution and why they're most excited about that, which is part of it. And that's obviously what, the section of the question is, but it's also an opportunity for you to convey a part of your story and talk about your narrative and how you've done things to think critically and to utilize that interdisciplinary approach. And then you're gonna take advantage of these programs and work with these professors and take these classes. And I mean, you do a good job in a short window of time of talking about several elements of the institution that you are hoping to take advantage of. And it also, from a reader standpoint, I read this and I think to myself, like, oh, this kid's going to hit the ground running. Like, he knows exactly what he wants to do, and is ready to kind of jumpstart it at our institution. So I think that's really a key for me is how do you merge these two worlds, a world that you've never gone to before and this new world. Was researching colleges in this way, was that helpful for you in understanding the different institutions, or were you looking at it more formulaically of like, I'm going to have to talk about things? Or did you feel like you learned a lot because of these Y essays?
No, I definitely did learn a lot because there's a lot to take from all these websites. And I mean, and I also read like personal comments of people, blogs, different things. I watched videos. I mean, pretty much anything I can get my hands on, right, related to topics that I was interested in, because it's interesting to also hear like different people's perspectives on the school. Some are positive, some are negative, but you have to find your place in the middle, like, and what really means something to you. So I tried to use different sources.
Yeah. And that's what research is, right? Like, if I were to say to an average high school student, I want you to go spend 30 minutes and do research on the University of Pennsylvania. My guess is the vast majority, probably more than 90% of students, would come back and they would say things like, here's the admit rate. Here's the average SAT. Here's the maybe student to faculty ratio. And so the majority of what the research is that they're doing is not on the actual institution. It's primarily on the likelihood that it is for them to be admitted to the institution. That's very different from research on the institution. Or it's very basic stuff like average class size and student to faculty ratio and things like that. Those things are fine and they play a role. But when a student begins this research project, I oftentimes say, okay, write a Y essay. Right? Like, why would you want to go to this place? Because you need to understand what the school is offering, how you're going to take advantage of it. It's helping you to develop your understanding of college, right? You've never gone to college before, so you're establishing an understanding there. And then you're also developing content that's important for you. So talk to me a little bit about, as you approach this essay and as you did the research on the colleges, like, how much time are you spending on writing these essays and doing research on them?
A long time. I mean, for Penn specifically, because Penn offers only one supplemental, and that one being, right, the why question. So the Penn one was a bit more tricky because other schools had, 10 supplementals, which can be tiring because you have to write a lot. But at the same time, they give you a lot of opportunities to kind of like display different sides to you, your different interests, right, and different questions. While in Penn's, it's just one, right? So you really have to get everything in there, or not everything, but the most important, like highlight the most important facts about yourself in a way that relates to the question, right? So that was the struggle, right? What do I take in? What do I not take in? And then how do I formulate it in a way that it's still about the school, right? And it's really not just you talking about yourself. So there's a fine line between those two, I feel like. So it's difficult. And it took a long time, especially the Penn one. Yeah.
Yep. And I think that's got to be the approach, is like, look, if I'm going to apply to selective and highly selective schools, I've got to put the work in, right? Like I've got to write something. I've got to present something in a way that they're going to read this and they're going to say, oh, dang, all right, like this is interesting. This student has an understanding of the school, and I feel like they're going to be able to take advantage of our resources in a way that maybe other students in the applicant pool don't. So you've got to put the time in. You're not just going to, apply to 20 schools and, copy and paste things. It's no different than if you apply for a job.
Yeah.
If you have a basic cover letter and you don't adjust anything and you send it in, like, it's probably not going to happen. So it's less of a quantity over quality and more certainly focused on the quality of the application as opposed to just trying to throw things out there.
Yeah. Well, the competition is immense, but I think it's really important that one is still genuine in these applications because, like I said, at the end of the day, like, Penn chose me, right, to go to their college. And I think they made a good fit because I was being real. Like I was trying to be honest about what I was interested in, what I was not interested in, and I feel like a lot of people try to inflate their applications, right? It's a natural thing because you want to come across as like more interesting or, more appealing to the school.
Yep.
But at the same time, it's first of all, it's harder to write. I have found sometimes because it doesn't really come from you. So it's like a bigger effort to, kind of make things up or just write about it genuinely. And at the end of the day, I think it's in your own best interest, honestly.
Yeah, I think your application, you do a couple of things really well. I think certainly the YSA is a really good representation of who you are as an applicant and why you make sense for that institution. I also think that you, from a project standpoint, you go out and you do something. Like you're trying to do something, and I think so often students are focused on the accolade of, I won this award, or I was chosen for this, or whatever it may be, as opposed to focusing on how do you pursue something and not just have an idea, but like go do it, like go talk to people, go understand the world more, understand how these things that you're interested in are happening. Like, why are things happening a certain way? How could you maybe create an impact and do something with that? And so I think that from a presentation standpoint, like that's just such a key, and you do a really good job of presenting it. You're not looking for an award. You have an interest in this, and it comes from kind of these intersections of different cultures and communities that you're a part of, and you try to do something. And the actual trying to do something, I think, is often missed, honestly. So talk to me a little bit about what that gap year has looked like over the last year or so. Like what are some of the things that you've kind of dove into that you feel like have actually prepared you more so for the start of your experience at Penn?
So for me, I wanted to go into a subject that I didn't know as well, which is, economics and finance. So I did an internship at a private bank here in Zurich, essentially just trying to get a feel for the place and a feel for the people. How do these people why do they do the things they do, and how do they do them? And like, what kind of person does it take to do like this job? And then I guess I didn't learn as much of what specifically I want to do because there's still so much out there, right, in that world as well. But I was able to say like, well, this does not interest me as much. So I was able to say like, these are things that I probably wouldn't want to pursue further. And then I did the same thing, but with a field that I already knew, namely biology and chemistry. So I worked at a lab at the university here at ETH and the University of Zurich at a neuroscience lab. And that was, again, like the practical approach of in the industry, well, not in the industry because it's still academic, but in the academic industry, right? How do these people operate? How do they go about their research? And it was no longer in school just replicating things that, people had already done. It was, new research. How do you publish papers, right? All of that and how that comes into play. And then at the end, having both of those internships, I was able to say, like, take away the important parts from both of them that I'd want to like pursue further in college. And then for me, it was, well, I can't really decide between the two. And then the good thing at Penn is you don't have to, right? You get to combine both of them in this dual degree program where you do life sciences and management at the same time. And so that's something that I'm going to try and get into freshman year.
Cool. I love it. Yeah, I think so much of your story is based off of the idea of finding those interdisciplinary connections, and I find that that's so effective within the application process. But then also just the way that you look at the world and how you approach things is how can we merge different things that we're interested in and find commonalities. And I think you do a really interesting job of presenting that within your application as well. So. Lorenzo, I appreciate you taking the time and sharing all of your experiences and providing so much insight. It's been super helpful and exciting to learn more about your story, and I'm excited to see what the future holds for you. So thanks again for taking the time, and look forward to learning more in the future.
Yes, thank you for having me on. It's really interesting.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you, you too.